Hi, welcome to my channel Cloud with Girish. In this video, I'm going to show you how to deploy AWS Lambda function and create an API endpoint using SAM CLI. This is part 3 of the Develop AWS Lambda function locally with SAM CLI, Docker, Python, and VS Code workshop series. In the part 1, I demonstrated how to develop and test AWS Lambda function locally using SAM CLI, Docker, Python, and VS Code. In the part 2, I demonstrated how to develop Lambda function locally and added an API endpoint using AWS console. If you have not watched part 1 and part 2 of this workshop for developing and testing Lambda function locally, links are in the description. Please do watch. Since this is a developer workshop, I assume you already have VS Code, Python, SAM CLI, Docker, and AWS Toolkit extension installed. We need all these software tools to develop Lambda locally. I will use a sample event request JSON to pass the parameter required for Lambda function. Here is the architecture design for this part 3 series of the workshop. We have a Lambda function. Lambda function has a Python code which has a dictionary, and based on the state code passed, we are getting a state name in the response. We are triggering the Lambda function via an event which is invoked by the REST API endpoint. I'm using a SAM CLI to create this entire tech stack. I'm using the Python and VS Code to write the Lambda function. We will use CloudWatch to monitor the log. This is the part 3. Let's get started. In this workshop, I will review the SAM template required to create the Lambda function and API endpoint. I'll deploy the Lambda function with API endpoint using SAM. I'll test the REST API endpoint using Postman, review the log in CloudWatch, and at the end, I will delete the SAM CloudFormation stack since I don't want to incur the cost for the resources, which I'm not going to use after the workshop. Here are the tools that we need. Again, SAM CLI, Docker, VS Code, Toolkit, Lambda function, and API gateway. Before we start the workshop, reminder to set up your budget and familiarize yourself with Cost Explorer. Once you set up the budget, you will get notified whenever you are near or above the threshold. Now, if you have completed the part 1 and part 2 of this workshop, your environment should already be set up. Let's review the function code, template, YAML, and event JSON again. So we're going to review the Lambda function. We're going to look at the YAML that defines our SAM template for Lambda resource and API event. We'll look at the API resource and, of course, the event JSON. So this is a function, a simple function. It does have the logging and try catch exception blocks here, but in a nutshell, it's getting a state code in the event via request, extracting it, and based on that state code, it's doing a lookup on the state dictionary and returning the state name in the response. Here is the template YAML. Again, it's defining few global variables. It has an API resource for the RESTful API using a stage name as dev, and there is another resource which defines the Lambda function. It's runtime is Python 3.0, 3.10. And then there is an event that's linked with the Lambda function that's invoking the RESTful API. There is an output section. It's really coming from the CloudFormation, but the benefit of using the output section here is that when I run it and when I deploy this tech stack, I don't have to go to the AWS console to find my API endpoint. I can get it from my terminal. And here is the event JSON. Simple parameter, just taking the state code as the parameter. There are a few commands that I'll be using. SAM build to build the code. There is a SAM local invoke function name to invoke the Lambda function. And there is a SAM local start API, which will run the API on my local host. Once I have tested the API locally, next step is to use the SAM deploy command. SAM deploy uses CloudFormation to create a stack, and it uses S3 bucket to store the artifacts that's being created. There is a SAM config file that stores all the configuration that you have selected. And once you have deployed, you can test it using the Postman or through your consumer app. Again, as part of the deployment process, you'll need to provide a stack name, answer question as prompted. You'll have opportunity to review the change set. And if change set looks good, then you confirm and deploy the change set. In our example, as you can see, my tech stack has the rule, the Lambda function, API, and the stage for the API. Both Lambda function and REST API, once they deploy, I can test it via Postman, integrate the API endpoint with consumer application. Of course, I can log into AWS console, search for AWS API Gateway service, and I will be able to see my API through console also. Here is an example in the Postman where I'm invoking the endpoint and getting a response back. Once I have created this function and API endpoint successfully, I can secure the API through a subscription key, can add a usage plan through the API gateway to control the number of invocation and requests the API can manage. Let's see it in action. I have started my VSCode. Let's look at my folder structure. I have a Python function called state name. I have template YAML. I have a event JSON that takes state code as the parameter, just like we talked about. Let's look at the state name function here. This is the function. It's a full dictionary. It will take the state code as the parameter, and it will do a lookup on that state code and return the state name in the response. Here is the template that's being used by AWS SAM, and it has my API defined, Lambda function, and event. That's the API event, and there is an output section that will give me the API endpoint. Let's build it using SAM build command. Once this is built, if I want, I can test it locally before I deploy it in AWS cloud using SAM deploy. Let's try testing locally. Start API. Just starting the API locally, I can go to this endpoint and I can test it locally at this point. I'm not gonna switch my screen to the browser, so let me kill this session. I wanna continue and deploy my tech stack here. So let's deploy it. I'm going to select the name suggested here. I'm going to deploy it in US East region. Yes, confirm changes before SAM CLI role creation, disable rollback. I don't have the authentication, that's why I'm getting the warning. If my API was secure via API or JWT, then I will not get this warning. I'm going to say yes. Save the configuration, select default, gonna create the change set. I will have the opportunity to confirm if I want to deploy this change set as a role, permission, function, API stage. Let's say yes, I want to deploy it. It's going to take a few seconds. It's creating these resources in AWS Cloud. And if it is successful, I should see the API endpoint towards the end. Once I get the API endpoint, I'm going to test it using the Postman tool. I have a Postman extension installed in my VSCode. I do have a video on it. If you want to see how to install the Postman extension, look for a video in my series to how to install the Postman. So here I got my API endpoint. Let's copy it. I'm going to just click on my Postman extension, new HTTP request. Let's copy it. We do need to pass the state code. I'm going to pass OH. And I'm getting the state name back. Let's try another state. And yes, it does work. Let's another state. Perfect. Let's try New York. Yes. So API endpoint is working as extended. At this point, my API is ready. It can be consumed by the API. Of course, I can secure the API by adding the subscription key. I'll do it in another workshop. Since I don't want to keep this tech stack, my endpoint is public. I don't want everybody to use this endpoint. So I'm going to delete this tech stack by using the SAM delete command. And once I delete it, it's going to delete all the resources that were created using the SAM template. And this is the power of like infrastructure as code, really using AWS SAM and CloudFormation. You can create your tech stack, you can test it, you can delete it, you can create it in a different environment. It's really, really powerful. So my tech stack has been deleted. That means all the resources that were created, those are no longer in AWS Cloud. If I'm going to click my endpoint again, it shouldn't work, and it does not work. It's an error because there is no API endpoint with this information since I have deleted it. So this is a very important step. Once you're done with your workshop, make sure you delete this stack so that you don't incur charges. You can use AWS CloudFormation command, or you can simply use SAM delete. In this case, since both Lambda function and API was created using SAM template, both will be deleted with this command. Here is a handy reference for some of the important AWS command, the SAM command, the build, the local invoke, local start API, deploy, and delete. Here are the list of services that I have used in this workshop: AWS Budget, AWS Cost Explorer, AWS SAM, AWS Lambda, AWS API Gateway, AWS S3. It got utilized by AWS SAM to store the artifact and resources which were getting created. CloudFormation. I use a part of CloudFormation. Of course, IAM role got created, and VSCode, AWS Toolkit, GitHub, Docker, these are all part of my tool set to create the function and the service. With this workshop, developing and deploying, creating an API endpoint for the Lambda function using SAM has been successfully completed. I have also validated the API endpoint using Postman. I then deleted the CloudFormation stack so that I don't incur cost using these resources. SAM is a powerful tool for developers to develop and test Lambda function and API endpoint locally, validating and then deploying to the cloud. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.